Morning, everyone, and welcome to the scoreboard. I'm Jared Kimber. Well, we got a result. I mean, that is a win, not for Bangladesh, of course, but a win for cricket. I think we are entering a new period of test matches where, dare I say, teams actually always try and go for a win. And it sounds weird if you've been following cricket just for the last 10 or 15 years, but it's not really how cricket went for a long time. There's a famous test series where New Zealand went to England just to see if they could draw the entire series without winning a single game. And a lot of this is just the natural evolution of cricket. There's a whole breed of players who have been brought up on T20 and one-day cricket where there's a result, right? They want a result. And let's be honest, I know occasionally we can have a very close draw and get really excited about it, but draws generally suck ass, right? They're not the most exciting thing in the world. But it's also a small part of the World Test Championship. Like, I know a lot of people shit on it, quite rightly. It does a lot. But to India specifically, it is the last silverware left to earn. Now, if you are someone who grew up watching cricket in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think the way that India played this match would have felt reckless. And it was reckless at times. Certainly, it was certainly out there. But in those days, test matches were about not losing. And I always hated that as a fan. And now it seems like India is going to go for wins as hard as they can. England obviously have played a big part in this, and I'm pretty sure Ben Duckett somewhere is claiming this victory as a moral one for England. But we've also seen teams like Zimbabwe and Pakistan think about these sorts of things as well. This seems like a movement right through the sport at the moment, basically to fuck draws off altogether. And if I put my body on the line for 5 days, or 2 in this case, I sure as shit want to come away with a win or at least a chance of one. And that is what India did. And this is how test match cricket should be played. INDvBAN helped me make this content. For detailed performance breakdowns of your game using technology and data, contact them today. Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a 6 from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend. All right, remember, this is the scoreboard part of the show. Please chuck us a like, a comment, and certainly if you have any questions, super chats are the way to go. But we'll go through the scoreboard. It's not going to be the longest scoreboard, of course, of all time. So we will get to your questions at the end. But let's start with the show. Bangladesh batters in the 3rd innings. I actually had another intro written, but I thought that was the better one. But essentially what I was going to say in the other one is, and I talked about this after the first test, Bangladesh came into this series with 3/4 strengths. There's a bit of crossover with their strengths, but obviously seam bowling was one of their strengths, and I think that completely stood up in the first test and, put them in a position to win that first test on day one, and also bowled well in the second innings as well. You then have their middle order, that 5, 6, 7, 8, which has been absolutely incredible at bailing out their top 4 consistently over the last couple of years. On top of that, you then have 2 of those players who are all-rounders, which gives them a 5-person bowling attack whenever they want to be able to use it, and also gives them 2 spinners who spin the ball in either direction. So am I missing anything else? Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, and just spinners in general, of course. So you look at all these things and you think, what's the thing that didn't work in this series? The spinners started to get their act together towards the end of this match. I mean, it's hard to tell, not towards the end of the match, but certainly in the first innings. It's hard to tell exactly because India were playing so hard. But there's no doubt that I thought the spinners were starting to bowl at the level that we probably wanted them to in the first test and never quite saw. Seam bowlers, as I said before, did fine. The 5-person attack allowed them flexibility. They could bring an extra spinner in this game. So that worked the way that they wanted to. The thing that didn't work for them in either match was 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's really, really disappointing that they couldn't get anything out of those positions. And because of that, they were in a position where they coughed up a test match that they probably shouldn't have lost. Like a normal batting day today. And I'm not saying they had to make tons of runs, but just a normal batting day would have made it really, really hard for India to be able to get there. And a lot of that credit goes to India, obviously, as well, that the level of the bowling. But all the way through, Bangladesh had chances to be able to claw themselves back into situations and never quite did it. Like, for instance, in the first innings, they got runs out of Momin ul Haq, and they couldn't find anyone in that sort of incredible 5, 6, 7, 8 combo that they have to just stay there. The first test, when they lost too many wickets early on, they had a chance then of getting to a position where those guys could chip in and do what they'd been doing for a long time. So it's really disappointing that they found themselves in that position in pretty much all 4 innings, right? And they just didn't get what they needed out of it. Bangladesh batters control percentage, there really isn't much here that we need to talk about all that much. The Indian bowlers. So again, Bumrah just being absolutely fantastic here. With 3 wickets at less than 2 runs and over. Not enough people. I've done that twice now. Not enough people go at less than 2 runs and over anymore. I'd like more people going at less than 2 runs and over, especially just with other bowlers going for more runs around them. Siraj, I think this sort of keeps that debate up of I don't think it's the most important thing in the world that this happened, but there is an element, of course, that he could still go for runs. I'm not sure it's really a story from today. And then we've got Ashwin and Jadeja up here, both taking wickets as well. Full shot percentage, 38%. It'd be interesting. I don't know if we've looked at it, but across formats, Bumrah would have to have the highest full shot percentage, I would have thought, in cricket by a significant amount. Just because it's so rare to see someone timing him. Like when you see someone just play, even just something like a really nice flick off the pads off him, it just feels bizarre because it's something that we don't see all that often. We got Ashwin here as well, and then everyone else actually they played quite well. Bumrah's average versus other seamers in the same games by country. So this is something that we started looking at quite a lot. You can see here that most seamers average 36.75 in India, and he's averaging 15.48. It is remarkable. But also, we have talked about this a little bit before. In the places where seam bowlers do well, like England, New Zealand, and South Africa, he doesn't stand out at all, right? Like it's the places where I know seam bowlers do well in Australia, but Australia is flat pitches. So anywhere where there's lateral movement, Bumrah doesn't show out. And the minute there's no lateral movement, he's unplayable. So I wonder if there isn't an element, and this is not the time to talk about it, but I wonder if there isn't an element of him overthinking what he needs to do on those other wickets. Or maybe he should bowl the exact same way on wickets that help him rather than trying to bowl the conventional way. Because his best way is still better than anywhere else. But it's a fascinating pattern that I'm sure we will talk about more. India's seamers speed. We talked about this before, this Akash little jump up here, this sort of Twin Peaks. There's a callback. Did they remake Twin Peaks? Maybe they did. Maybe young people still understand what I'm talking about there. But you can see here that Akash has 2 distinctive balls. It'd be really interesting to know if this is like one of these is the wobble ball and one of these is him trying to swing it or something. Like if it's actually 2 different deliveries. I'm not sure if we can quite get to that. It might be something for someone like Jimenez to have a look at. But it feels like to me that there is, you just don't see that many seamers do this in red ball cricket. This is something you sometimes see in white ball cricket a little bit more. Then we've got Siraj, who was a little bit down on pace today, and Bumrah, the range of which he bowls different speeds it's ridiculous. His ability to ramp up and ramp down is unparalleled. I don't think we've ever seen a red bowler like this. There was red ball bowler like this. There were stories about Alec Bedser that were quite similar. That there was an element of Alec Bedser. I think it's Alec Bedser I'm thinking of, that didn't bowl a consistent pace. So, Alec Bedser wasn't quick like Bumrah. He was probably more like a Sam Curran type speed, but that he was constantly just going a couple of kilometers quicker, a couple of kilometers slower. When he bowled his real cutters, it would slow down because he was essentially bowling a slow ball, except that's not what we called it at the time. And this is the Indian spinners on speed. This is very fascinating. So we've got Ashwin is the two, the blue and the green lines here. So you can see he hasn't changed all that much. The only difference is in the second innings that because the pitch was helping him a little bit more, he kind of focused on what he would probably consider his optimal speed for bowling on a spinning wicket. But what's interesting more is the Jadeja. So you've got here Jadeja was very one-dimensional in the first innings, going over and over again. And then in the second innings, we see this sort of twin peak. Sorry, again. I'll have to start talking backwards soon. All three people who got that joke, well done. And so, yeah, we could see here that there's a bit of a split, but also just how much quicker he gets. So there's a little bit in that sort of 93, 94 bit, but before he's like right around the 92, 93 area. And now he's got a lot of balls up because he knows he's going to get more assistance off the pitch. So he's not trying to rag it as much. He's like, the pitch will help me a little bit. It's quite interesting to see the difference. And this is, again, one of the reasons these guys are so good. So in this series, we talked about how they bowl quicker than the Bangladesh spinners, how they've been more accurate in general, certainly than Shakib, than the Bangladesh spinners. And then you've also got the fact that their ability to change for the their ability to change for the conditions when they have to, and also, like, if you look at, it's probably a little bit here with Jadeja, but you can certainly see it with Ashwin sometimes he's got even three peaks. This is probably more of a two peak one where this is his optimum pace, and then he's gone in a little bit here for his slightly quicker one. But sometimes you can even see a third little peak for him. Just their ability, there's so many ways that they are better than other spinners. They're not one-dimensional spinners in the way that Nathan Lyon's not quite this kind of bowler, but for many years, Nathan Lyon was a one-dimensional spinner. That one dimension was really, really good. But it was one thing that sort of had him apart from Ashwin or Graham Swan, is that they had other dimensions that they could go to, and Lyon never did. Just having a look at Akash here again was the one I wanted to look at here. Not so much grouping on a length, but very, very accurate on a line here, which is very, very cool. Something you want to do. And then we've got the two spinners here as well. I don't think there's anything massively interesting from this. No, they just took wickets. There's not a lot of cricket today. Jaiswal went out at the end, which was kind of funny. And in some ways, isn't that what we want? Like, we'd already been entertained. It's nice to get some fun at the end. It's funny watching senior batters watch a junior batter do this. And Jaiswal done this twice now. I feel like he has. And it's real. You watch the senior batters just be like, oh, what are you doing? Do you know how hard it is to keep your average high? Like, you've got to think about your average, son. I promise you, there were just thousands of aging professional batters watching that, just going, no, not for you. Indian batters control percentage, again, not really anything all that important there. And then you've got the Indian batters attacking percentage as well. Obviously, they were trying to finish it off on what was it wasn't a tricky enough surface that 90 was a problem. There was a game I was watching yesterday. It was Oman, Canada. It was a T20 game. And it was quite a fascinating one because Canada I think they lost 2 wickets in the first over. And then they lost Curtin quite early on. It's obviously their best bat. And they struggled. They got to about 109 or so, 106 maybe. And it was the kind of wicket that was just dangerous enough that you thought, oh, if they get 2 or 3 early wickets, they can put pressure on. And they might be able to just get this through, and they didn't get the wickets, and they chased it easily. And I was watching this chase today, so I know it's a test match chase and slightly different and everything else, but I was thinking to myself, they probably need 4 wickets really early on here, because the wicket, even though they're going to get some balls that keep low and everything, it's not enough, and it's not happening quickly enough for it to put any pressure back on India. And of course, they got the 2 wickets and then never really could add to those. So Mahidi Hassan, I think, comes away with his reputation intact. I don't think he's improved it or anything. would have wanted more runs with his batting, but I think his bowling, and I like the way he changed. As I said before, I feel like he did learn a little bit and started to develop his game as he went through. We could see here he was the only one that really caused any issues at all. Not massive issues there, but any issues at all. All right, that is the end of the scoreboard. Remember, comment, like, subscribe, do all those things. I'm going to take a quick break while I go through your comments and questions. If you have put it in a super chat, we will get to that. And if you haven't, we might pick up some other questions as well. But I'm Jared Kimber, and this is the Scoreboard. If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at good areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today. All right, welcome back. Yeah, we've got a few questions here. So Varun, if you want to pop up the first one. Keshav says, can we compare Bumrah, Ashwin to how McGrath Warne operated? No, I don't think they're that similar. So I'm trying to think of some of the great sort of spin seam partnerships. I suppose the other one would be Anderson Swan would be an interesting one. And the one that instantly came to my mind when I saw this question was Vas Murali. And I think the big difference here is that Bumrah is not a huge spell kind of seamer, partly because he's a little bit quicker than those other three guys, right? So McGrath and Anderson and Vas could bowl really, really long spells. So let's say, I don't know, it's the second innings of a test match, and you've Australia's got the opposition 100 for 2, and it's lunch, and they come out after lunch. You probably know you're going to face about 20 overs of Warne and McGrath, right? Like that's an intense thing to go up against. It's really unlikely, I think, you're ever going to face 20 overs of Bumrah and Ashwin for two reasons. One, Australia didn't have all-rounders, right? I know Mark Waugh and Steve Waugh and Simons, but they didn't have a genuine five-man attack ever, depending on Steve Waugh's hamstring. That was the only time, maybe when he was near peak fitness, you could have a little bit of that. But he generally only bowled when it was swinging, which made sense. Which is very different than this kind of a five-man attack. So it's not really all that similar. Vas, again, probably the slowest of the four that we've just mentioned there. A swing bowler, but also a very accurate bowler, would bowl for long periods, and Murali would bowl at the end. So again, Vas would almost bowl as a stock bowler for Murali, to say to Murali, look, I'm only going to go at about 1.5, 2 runs and over in this spell, and then you can put pressure on at the other end. And Anderson and Swan, again, was probably more like that Warne McGrath combination of you've got a seamer who's going to be able to bowl a big spell at one end, and then the spinner will go at the other, and they're kind of bowling together for each other. So I think the Bumrah and Ashwin is very, very different, just because you don't get that kind of thing. But the partnership is there in that fact that you have a great spinner and you have a great seamer. But yeah, it's much more of a even when England had a 5-man bowling attack, I don't think it was ever that. They would have had a little bit of Freddie, wouldn't they? Swanee and Anderson. But I don't think they really had that. They usually, when Swanee was at his best, probably had 4 bowlers. So again, Swanee's bowling really long spells, Anderson's bowling really long spells, and they're doing it in tandem. So no, I think it's very different. I'm trying to think if there's another. I suppose Hall and Gibbs would be another one. Where's Hall? But again, where's Hall? Even though he's a faster bowler like Bumrah, probably was famous for bowling quite long spells. So I think it's a very different kind of partnership than the others. Ronak says, what do you think of Akashdeep in terms of being a viable 3rd, 4th seamer in the long run, especially in Australian conditions, given we have seen a fair bit of him against 2 contrasting international sides? Yeah, I think he's an interesting 3rd seamer. We were having a conversation off air, Varun and Rakshut and myself, we're having a bit of a conversation. I think it might have even been about this question. I think it's a fascinating one when you look at it, because Siraj, I don't think Akashdeep, I don't see anything in him that could suggest to me that he could be a leader of the attack, right? I don't think he has a hugely high ceiling. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be like a star bowler. But I also don't think, but I also don't think that like having a really like low floor, like he's got quite a high floor and a low ceiling. So he's a very consistent bowler. Whereas Siraj has a massively high ceiling, but at the moment he probably has a lower floor than Akash. So the two of them together is a decent kind of partnership. So if you think about it, if you've got Bumrah, and let's just put Bumrah there, Siraj as your number 2 bowler and Akash as your number 3 bowler, I think makes a lot of sense. Whereas I think if you have Bumrah and Shami, I probably want Siraj as my number 3 bowler because I trust the other two to be pretty much on it, right? Like they may not take wickets, but they'll be able to hold up an end and defend and everything else. Whereas I could be wrong. Was it at the Edgbaston, the retest when England, the first time India went up against Bazball? Was it that test that England went after Siraj? And I could be wrong here. I'm trying to remember back. What was that? 2023, 2022? What years are we in here? Yeah, so like if you look at that, I'm just trying to bring it up here. Sorry. Yeah, 2022, I was right. So I just want to have a look at Siraj's figures. Was it in the second innings? I was thinking. So first innings, he goes at 5.73, gets 4 wickets. So they went for him and they didn't get him. And then in the second innings, he went at 6.53. So I was right. I was remembering the right match. In that particular game, I think they had a bigger issue because the 5th bowler was shuttled. And so they basically had 2 guys. And so if you, my memory of it covering it live, I think I was commentating on that game, was they kept having to go back to Bumrah and Shami. And Jadeja bowled fine, but wasn't keeping it at like 2 runs and over or something. It's 3.5 runs and over and couldn't get any wickets. So they ended up with a 3-person bowling attack. They're probably not going to have Shardul as their 5th bowler and Siraj as their 4th bowler again. Not just because of this, just because I don't think it quite matches in the right way. Whereas, let's say they go to Australia and they have Hardik as their 5th bowler, who's the kind of bowler he is. He can bowl certain things that can help them. Like, you know, he can bowl the short ball strategy for a while, and you know, he can go with alternate tactics and everything else. And then you've got something else to rely on if Siraj doesn't have a good game, or if they go into a game where they have Bumrah, Shami, Ashwin or Kuldeep, Jadeja, right? Like, so Ashwin or Kuldeep and Jadeja with Siraj as the next bowler. You've still got 4 frontline bowlers, so Siraj can be used as the difference maker there again. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you don't have to bowl your 5th bowler all that much. So I think there's a flexibility there that Siraj, that they can use. The issue really comes about when Bumrah doesn't play, when Shami doesn't play. Of Siraj has all the skills to be a top frontline bowler. I've said this a million times. His best ball is as good as anyone's in world cricket, and I include Bumrah in that. His best ball is as good as Bumrah's, but his second best ball isn't at that same level, and his stock ball, when he's not getting it right, just goes for runs, and he can lose, and he can kind of, I want to say lose patience, but it's probably not patience. It's probably rhythm. You know, I do compare him a lot to Stuart Broad, but Stuart Broad's like a foot taller than him. So Stuart Broad can just go back to at least bowling that back of a length and try and dry it up again. And I don't know what Siraj's game is there. And it's quite interesting to watch. I know IPL is very different, but the IPL is where we've seen him as the lead bowler. And we've seen 2 really good seasons from him, I think. Certainly one where he took a bunch of wickets and one where maybe he didn't get hit off the square that much, off the top of my head. But we've also seen a bunch of seasons where it just hasn't worked. And so he could be a leader of attack, and he could be the number 2 bowler. So whereas Akash, I'm not sure, could be either of those things. But as what would you compare him to? A Peter Siddle, right? I'm trying to think of another bowler like that. Yeah, like like when Tim Bresnan was good. That kind of thing of like, they're actually putting wicket-taking threat on you, and their best balls are still really good and can get you out. But they don't need to. They're never going to be the lead bowlers in the attack. Akash has a really interesting role there to play, and also you can mix and match him and Siraj in different situations, right? So I think he's a fascinating cricketer going ahead. Drew says it's not because of England, it's because of the World Test Championship. So he's talking about India playing really quickly here. So this is a really important one. It's not because of the World Test Championship, and it's not because of England. As I said in the intro, Drew, which is I'm assuming when you put this comment up, it's because of a bunch of different things. Cricket has evolved, right? The players have evolved. The style has evolved. The outlooks have. When you say it's not because of England, would India have scored at 8 runs and over if we hadn't seen, and not just England, we've seen other teams try this as well, start to just go nuts? Travis Head, all these sorts of things. And some of it is the natural evolution of the players that are involved. So when you say it's World Test Championship, it's not just the World Test Championship, right? I've talked to some of the younger players, and they're just like, they don't get draws. So I grew up in the 90s. That's like my main era of Test cricket. And I hated draws. And I always moaned about draws. But the prevailing theory at the time was, no, draws are fine, right? And I always thought like, I was wrong. But there's a whole generation that I think have grown up a little bit more like me, of just like, what's the point of this, right? Like, if there's absolutely no other hope, you'll play for a draw. Otherwise, you play to get a result, and you try and win, and you believe you can win from any situation. That's the way that sport should be played. And Test cricket wasn't played that way, and I think it slowly changed. But scoring at 8 runs and over and everything, that is a direct... I mean, I think that movement, actually, if you want to know about England's role in it, I don't think England's role in it is specifically the Bazball. I think it's pre-Bazball. I think it's that 2015 to 2019 period where they were scoring at a run a ball between overs 10 and 40 in ODI cricket that has freed up all of cricket. I think that's actually maybe the most important thing that they ever did. But it's also the fact that Jaiswal he's been brought up on T20 cricket, right? You know, these players, even Rahul and Kohli and Rohit, a lot of their development is through limited overs cricket, T20 cricket, and one-day cricket. That's very different than the previous generations. So it's not England, and it's not World Test Championship, and it's not evolution, and it's not T20 and one-day cricket, and it's not bigger bats and everything. It's all of it. All right. The game was naturally moving towards this. And there was a period in, I can't remember what year it was, but maybe 2010, 2012, where we actually saw this little peak in strike rates in Test cricket. I think I'm right. But they came on the back of incredible averages. Like, I think there was one year where the batting average was like close to 40 in Test cricket. It was whatever it was. Maybe it's 38 or something, like ridiculously high for a game in traditionally has been about 32, right? Like this huge jump up. And there was a few years like that. We saw the strike rates go up. The difference now is we're seeing the strike rates go up without the averages necessarily going up. So there is a change in mentality right across the sport. And I think when we looked at it, I can't remember when it was, there is a difference now, and there's a freedom that players are being allowed to play. And this comes to scoring really quickly and the fact that they went for the win. It's kind of the combination of both. But yeah, there is a difference now that we are seeing in Test cricket, right? That we are literally seeing teams free themselves and back their players in a way that hasn't always been a part of Test cricket. Test cricket had been about not losing, and now it is about winning. England play a small part in that. I think they have, right? In the same way that you could say that Australia in the late 90s, early 2000s probably also played a small part in that, right? Like these things build up over time. That doesn't take the credit away from India because they just scored at 8 runs and over and forced the result in 2 days. Well, I mean, it's a magnificent effort. But the point being is this is larger than just about Indian cricket. This is really about where the game is headed. And the World Test Championship is a part of that. I talked about that on yesterday's show of in more depth of if you watched first class cricket, one of the reasons I always loved first class cricket was that teams always played for results because you had to get points. And so you saw these incredibly, risky, like innings like we saw yesterday from India, like incredibly risky innings being played because it's like, no, we need the points. And so that really changes things a lot. And that is the World Test Championship. there's still a difference between that and going at 8 runs and over. And there's still a difference between that and everything that has been coming. Like it would have been really hard 10 or 15 years ago for a team to score at 8 runs and over without slogging, right? That's how you scored at 8 runs and over in the old days, right? This wasn't slogging, right? Players have now come to a different level. That is the evolution of the sport. Can you please speculate on Bumrah ending with a sub-20 average by the end of his career? What's his age? I suppose that's almost the most interesting thing, isn't it? Is he 30? I should know this. I looked it up the other day. Yeah, he just turned 30, didn't he? When's his birthday? Yeah, so he turns 31 soon. I suppose the interesting thing is, Kartik, looking at the thing that we put up before, the analysis we put up before, it depends on how long he plays for and where he plays. If he plays in India, Asia, West Indies, the sub-20 average seems like a very high possibility, right, Kartik? Whereas if he plays in England, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand a lot, and we know he's got potentially 10 test matches in Australia and England coming up, will he go up? I don't think he's going to end up with a sub-20 average just because it just doesn't happen in Test cricket, right? But he's the guy that has the best chance of it. So yes, it's on the table. Generally, the problem with someone like Bumrah is that, although it doesn't happen as much with bowlers, but it certainly happens with batters. So it's the Ricky Ponting effect, right? And Sachin probably had a part of this. Javed, me and Dad. It's that you can't drop a player of that level, and so they get extra games at the end when they clearly have dipped down a little bit, and quite often their average goes up towards the end of their career. Doesn't happen as much with bowlers because bowlers get flicked away because no one cares about bowlers. But legends generally get more of a chance to prove that they're still at that level. So it's possible he dips below 20. I haven't got his average in front of me, but it's possible he dips below 20. And then towards the end of his career, it might go just back above 20. It's also interesting to know if he cares, right? Like a lot of it is about him caring. And the other thing I would say is that he might not get the opportunity to play against as many poorer sides if India, and this depends on India's seam bowling and conditions and everything else. But if India is so good, he might get rested more against some poor batting lineups just because they don't need it. Aditya says, do you think New Zealand can compete better than what Bangladesh did this series? That feels like someone who wasn't watching the Sri Lanka series. I mean, to be fair, I still think India, what are they called? New Zealand had chances to win that first test, probably twice, and let it go. I think Sri Lanka's a good team, so I don't think it's and playing well at home at the moment. So I don't think it's horrendous to believe that they went up against them and then struggled. But pound for pound, I think Bangladesh has better seamers for Asian conditions. Their spin is not even comparable. Top order, New Zealand certainly has them. Middle order, probably, especially in Asian conditions, I would say Bangladesh has them. They have a legitimate 5-person bowling attack. So if you look at what New Zealand have been using, Ajaz Patel. It's Ajaz Patel, Santner, Ravindra, Phillips. So like there's a lot of kind of all-roundery, like even Santner probably at test level is probably more of an all-rounder bits and pieces player than he is a genuine frontline spinner. Phillips is obviously still keeps having success, but is not a frontline bowler, and Rachin Ravindra will suit the Indian wickets quite well, and I thought bowled well at times in the last series. But again, I don't think we're going to expect anything massive from him. So they have more bowling options in their side, but I don't think they have 5 bowlers of the same quality that Bangladesh did. But they're maybe a slightly more experienced is the wrong way. I feel like this Bangladesh side is still trying to come to grips with who they are as a team. Whereas I think even if New Zealand is completely on the slide, I think the structure that they're in is a little bit more robust. But I don't really expect them to play better than Bangladesh. No. I think I said at the start of the series, Bangladesh is the team I would have preferred to have the 3 tests and New Zealand the 2. Sumik says, can Zeros intentionally lower the ball bounce? Not if you're saying the ones that just don't bounce at all. That's more to do with the pitch. But there are ways that you can do that. So, for instance, underspin, side spin, and everything else, low arm action. So there are different ways you can get the ball to bounce less. So if you're trying to think of someone who does it a lot, I think we've seen Ashwin do it. But sometimes you'll see a finger spinner who will bowl from, let's say, here, right? So fairly sort of conventional height, and then they'll just drop their arm. When they're dropping their arm, one of the things they're trying to do is get the ball to keep a little bit lower. But batters pick that up. Like us batters, even subconsciously, will pick that up and realize that this next one might skid through a little bit more. So if you're looking at the balls that roll along the ground that we saw, was there one to Kohli, I think, at the end? That is probably more to do with the pitch. Renee says, should Bangladesh be given test status? They already have test status, so yes. They've been playing for 20 years and have nothing to show for it. Surely we can rescind test status of teams if they don't show improvement. Oh, Renee, you've walked into a meat grinder here. Firstly, they just beat Pakistan away. So they've also beaten England, Australia, New Zealand. Haven't they beaten almost every team in Test cricket now? Have they beaten South Africa? I'm not sure if they've beaten South Africa. So again, you're wrong. On top of that, they have shown plenty of progress. In fact, we've done a whole video on it on the major channel. You can see how bad they were before and how good they are now. To say they've shown no progress is idiotic. The third thing is that New Zealand didn't win a test series for 39 years. I think we should ban New Zealand, take away their World Test Championship for those first 39 years. South Africa won 2 series in 45 years, I think. And I don't want to say those series were a fluke because they weren't, but there was an element of weirdness in those series. And they also weren't playing a very good England team at that time. As in England were picking like a third 11 to play them. Certainly the first time they beat them anyway. Can't remember the second one, but so what are we talking about here? It's hard. Test cricket's hard. India weren't a particularly good team for a long period of time, right? I don't know what India's win-loss record was between 1930 and 1960, but I can't assume that they were like a dominant team either. And probably, again, I would have assumed very good at home and very good against other poor teams. I think India were probably shielded by the fact that New Zealand was so bad. It takes a long time. And not only should we not be rescinding test status, I would go a step further than that and say test status should not exist. We should have tiers of test cricket. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and, Tier 4. No problems with that. You should have to work your way up and work your way down like any other sport. But if we go back to this whole idea that they don't deserve it, I'm sorry, fuck off. It's such a stupid way of thinking about our sport. Our sport should be encouraging people to be playing Test cricket, not rescinding people's rights to play Test cricket. It's a private members club, Test cricket, and it's disgusting, and that's why we only have a couple of teams who are good at it. America should be a test nation. Ireland should be a test nation. Argentina, Denmark, all should have been test nations. Not to mention that Sri Lanka should have been a test nation ages before they were. Right? India probably should have been a test nation ages before they were. That is where Test cricket should be going, not the opposite. Yash says, Hitler Mask was a movie character. Misunderstanding. Okay. It was still someone dancing in a Hitler mask, man. I don't know. I don't know why you. I'm not sure why we're trying to defend that. Anyway, Agro says, despite the resilience of weather, incompetent administrators, Indian cricket team beat Bangladesh with a session to spare. Where would you rank this amongst other Indian sides? So when I must have been during COVID, I said this was the best Indian side I'd ever seen, like when they played England that first time. So when Root makes the double 100 and then India just crushed them in all the other games. I can't remember the full results, but I thought at that stage that this was the best Indian side I'd ever seen. And I think people get upset because of the Dravid, Tendulkar, Sehwag, Blackman, Ganguly era, right? Kumble. And Jawaharlal Srinath and all incredible team. The difference is that to win test matches at a really high rate, you need a great bowling attack. And India don't have a great three-person bowling attack. Like, let's say, what was the Australian lineup? Was Gillespie, Warne, McGrath, and then there's a bit of a drop to the fourth bowler, right? Like, there were some good fourth bowlers and some, I think Damien Fleming would have been a much better bowler if he'd been fit regularly. And Brett Lee was a really good bowler who, for some reason, didn't have a great record in Test cricket. So there were some really good other bowlers around. But Australia never had. I mean, Warne McGrath overcame so many of the issues. But Australia never had a consistently great four-person attack where all four bowlers were almost unplayable over a long period of time. India currently have two great seamers. They have maybe four. Well, let's say they have two out-and-out great spinners. And then they have two other spinners who might be also in the top four best spinners in the world at the moment, right? Maybe you throw Lyon in there as well, which is probably fair. But, Akshar and Kuldeep are right up there. I don't think I've ever seen a team with that kind of depth. And then you add the batting, because they have the Jadeja and Ashwin's batting as well. And if you throw Hardik in, I think, again, they would even have more depth and flexibility, right? So when has India ever had a team with four great bowlers before consistently? They've had them with four really, really good bowlers, but I'm not sure they've ever had this, and certainly not over a long period of time. They've then not had always had the all-round period outside of sort of Vinu Mankad and Kapil Dev. So they haven't always had the flexibility of having an extra player in the lineup, which they now have thanks to Jadeja. And they also have a backup in Akshar Patel who can also do it. They still have batting legends playing. So they have, let's say Shubman Gill and Jaiswal are potential. Like, who knows where they're going to go, but let's take those completely out. They've got Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, like proper heavy hitting batting talent there. So the batting isn't quite as deep as some of those other sides that we mentioned before, but you don't win test matches with batting, right? You get consistency from your batting. You win test matches with bowling. So I find it hard to say that this isn't the greatest Indian side that I've seen. And the numbers would bear that out from the amount of games that they've won, how good and how consistent they are on the road. I think during their era, like, Australia have been really good. There may be even times when Australia was on that level, certainly a home and away. New Zealand was a really, really good team. England has had some fun moments. South Africa still has a ridiculous attack. So it's not a situation like perhaps when Pakistan got to number one. Pakistan deserved to be number one. I thought they played fantastically, but I thought that was a bit of a dip time. Right? Maybe even when South Africa got to number one. Again, completely deserved it. Really, really high quality teams. Not slamming those teams, but what I'm saying is maybe that was a bit of a dip, and there was a few other teams that were, retooling or struggling a little bit who would usually be pressuring them. I'm not sure if you could really say that for what this is. I think it's a really strong era. I mean, the fact that India have been this good and have won the World Test Championship, forget the conditions, because they played really well in England. But that shows you that there were two other strong teams. Maybe the conditions played a part. I mean, obviously they played a part, I should say. But I think that also proves that there's a strong era here. So yeah, I can't imagine there's ever been a better Indian team. I haven't really gone through it. It was really interesting when I went through one with Jeremy Coney. It's a really good podcast. It's worth having a look at that if you ever get a chance. Of when you start compare modern teams to older teams, sometimes there are things that you don't always come across on that depth. So if I went through it with India, maybe I would change my mind and be like, actually, this period from blah, blah, blah to blah, blah, blah is the best Indian team ever. But I can't imagine there's ever been a better Indian team than this. But that's also what I said about New Zealand. And then by the end, I was a bit in the middle. Tree. I love the concept of the World Test Championship, and also the fact this Indian team is probably the first team to take it serious. How do you see the evolution of this World Test concept going further with its flaws? Look, the problem is I don't know how it ever overcomes its fall streak. It's never going to have a proper schedule. It's never. I don't think in the short term anyway, and I'm talking 10 to 15 years here, so maybe that's not short term. I don't see how we can ever get it into a proper schedule, and that's the issue, really. So depending on who you play and where you play them has such a big impact on who makes the final. What I would love is a proper league of Test cricket, which I think I said it before with Renee's question. I think if we can get to a point where we have a proper league of Test cricket, so we have 7 teams in Division 1, 7 teams in Division 2, 7 teams in Division 3, and then probably sort of a separate sort of structure underneath that. And then you can play up, one team goes up, one team goes down every couple of years, and you play all the teams from your league. That I think would be brilliant. But yeah, I think we've seen for a little while, and I don't think India's the only team to take it seriously, but I think India, in having lost it, for them makes a lot more sense, right? So I think it's a really, really, it could be a really important thing that India is so desperate for this, to the future of it. Where India has its success and where India has its losses is so important to the short-term importance of cricket. It really is. So that West Indies World Cup that we just saw, the broadcasters did not want that in that time zone. They wanted it in the Asian time zone, that World Cup. They wanted them to be switched over. And so for the USA and West Indies to have the next one, because they wanted the T20 World Cup to be huge and take over from the ODI World Cup, right? So when India win it, you have this spin back, right? Of now that is a really important World Cup already. And so, India can change something so simple. And by, a couple of years ago when Virat Kohli kept going on and on about how important Test cricket was, these sorts of things really, really matter to how people are planning things, because so much is done worried about what the BCCI thinks, what Star or Sony or whoever, Hotstar, although, all Disney, whoever's broadcasting cricket in India, on it, all those things matter of how that you work those together. Anil says, while Test cricket is alive, is ODI cricket still viable, or should it be transformed into a 2-innings T20 format? I mean, I've said this 100 times. A 2-innings T20 format was one of the worst things I've ever seen when they tried it in Australia. I don't think it particularly worked. I don't see the point of making it like T20 cricket. T20 cricket already exists. Why would you go to watch that? I actually think if ODI cricket, if the real thing that ODI cricket should do is break away from Test cricket and T20 cricket. And Test cricket should also do the same thing. All 3 formats should be run separately, the same way that IndyCars and Le Mans and Grand Prix are run separately. That's the best thing for all 3 formats. And separate to that, I actually think ODI cricket should... the best form of ODI cricket is 40 over cricket, by the way. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's so much better than 50 or 55 or 60 or 65 or double innings or split innings or all these things. The best format I've ever seen by a distance is 40 over cricket. The issue at the moment is I don't think you can do 40 over cricket anymore because it's too close to T20, the same as this idea. And then the second thing I would add to that is that we have a situation where I would be trying to work out how we can make ODI cricket different to Test cricket and to T20 cricket, so it has its own reason for existing. Speed the Goat says, can Ashwin Jadoo back up bats like them? I don't quite know what you mean by that. Back up bats like them. I mean, they can both bat a little bit. One's an all-rounder and one's very, very handy. So yeah, I suppose. Sorry, I don't know what that means. Manon says, KO Rahul, Siraj, stock up or stock down after this is. Oh, I like that. I'd have to go back and look at Siraj. I think he's probably about level. And KO Rahul, I think KO Rahul's probably a slight up, isn't he? Overall, I would have said. I think the fans aren't going to see it that way, but I think the team would be pretty happy with that kind of thing. Manan says, should India have dedicated test venues like England and Australia? It's a very different kind of country, right? You look at England, and England doesn't have many big cities. So it's very easy for them to have, 5 or 6 major stadiums, right? Australia has 5 or 6 major cities, so it has more big cities than England, but that's it, right? Like, there aren't that many other places that you can play. Like, Canberra is not a particularly big place. They've tried a couple of games in Darwin and Northern Queensland at times, which I think they'll continue to do, probably off season. But generally, they're going to go to the bigger grounds. India is a very different kind of situation, and I kind of think that you should be in a situation where you are spreading the game as far and wide as possible. The issue is that it's very hard for a ground to have great facilities if there is no, if they're not playing major games regularly. So if you play a game in Kanpur now, and then you play, I don't know, a one-day next year, and a T20 the year after, and then another test in a couple of years' time, they're not making big money in order to make sure that their facilities are ready for the big games. And that's the problem that we see. This isn't just an Indian thing. I see this a lot through cricket. Drainage is one of those things, but also conditions for the amount of training pitches you have, broadcast facilities, all these little things that we don't know. We saw the rain side of it, but we don't see all the other side of it. And I've seen players go to really good little venues in Test cricket and complain because the training facilities weren't up to scratch, right? They put all their money to make sure that the wicket was right, and maybe they did get drainage or whatever, and they didn't. And it's the same with broadcasters. Broadcasters find it really hard to broadcast from some of these grounds because they're not set up for major international games. And so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. The only way for them to get better is to give them more games. But if you do give them more games and you have more situations like this when they're not ready, then they're less likely to get more games into the future. So I always think of Cardiff as a really interesting one in England. Obviously, Wales wanted as much international cricket as they could. Rugby is quite big. Football has a bit of a hold, and cricket traditionally is a Welsh sport, of course, but it's not as if it's massive in Wales, right? Like it's not as big as anywhere else. So the government basically said, we're going to start hosting games, and we're going to spend a ton to make sure that the facilities are up, and we're basically going to, spend our money to bring the ECB over. Unfortunately, that's probably the future, isn't it? Right? That's what will have to happen. And the problem is, you're then talking about taxpayers' money, right? Like I have no idea how the Welsh system works, but it's if the Welsh government is propping up that ground and paying for that ground and making sure it's of a world-class standard, so that 2009 Ashes was probably the first major thing that they hosted and that they really wanted. That means that you're putting yourself in a situation where you are spending taxpayers' money, and that comes back to the whole, American sports stadiums being funded by the people in the towns rather than the owners and everything else. The BCCI have enough money to be able to make a bunch of smaller grounds world-class standard. Whether that's the best use of their money, it's a completely different thing. But you should be trying to get to a situation where you're spreading the game. The money that BCCI is making at the moment should be able to change the entire future of cricket in India. I don't know if they'll keep making this money. I think they will. But the money they're making right now, they should be able to have 500 professional women's players, for instance. They should be able to have an academy in almost every major city that is available for any young, talented player, regardless of gender. They should be able to have professional coaches that the BCCI, like the money that they are making is so high. And they could also use it for things like this if they wanted to spread the game to areas. I mean, we're talking about Kanpur where they love cricket, but also East India is, a fascinating story when it comes to cricket, right? And there are little bits of India that I think are really, really fascinating. There is enough money to do that. I mean, we don't see the full spreadsheets of the BCCI, but we know the money is being made. But how they spend it is a really interesting one. And so far, I don't think we have seen enough results of how they have spent that money to know if they're going in the right direction. But they could set themselves up for life in many different ways, and including the fact that they could future-proof cricket in those other areas that love it, that may still be a hotbed. But what is the idea? Like, what is the overall plan? Because no cricket board has ever been in a situation like the BCCI before, and cricket boards generally are not used to this sort of thing. There's a great moment in when Kerry Packer, I think he's on TV in England when he's taking over cricket, and there's I think it was Robin Marler, this English journalist, says to him, he's just come in and he's taking over cricket and he's making money from cricket, and Kerry Packer goes, "You guys had 100 years to do that." Right? So that's kind of how cricket has always been run. And so now you're seeing this incredible amount of money coming into one cricket board specifically, and a little bit with England as well, although obviously they've spent a lot on the 100 now, so they're no longer as rich as they were a couple of years ago. But how do you spend that, and where do you spend that? Is it worth having great little boutique grounds around India so that you can keep encouraging the fans through international cricket who may never get an IPL team, right? Is it worth investing all that money into coaches and into players and into facilities at that level? Where do you put that money? I think it's a fascinating question of where Indian cricket can go. And as I said, no one's ever been in this position before, right? And at the moment, it feels like they're a little bit just standing pat and not sure which direction to go. But if you're the BCCI and you've decided to put a test in this venue, I don't think you can then accuse the local people of not looking after it, not being. You've decided that. Like, the board might point to the local authorities on the ground and go, "Oh, this wasn't up to scratch. You guys didn't do the right job," and etc., etc. But the truth is, the BCCI run cricket, and at a certain point, they make the decision to go there. And so they have to decide whether that's something they want to worry about. And to go back to the original question, in the main 5 or 6 venues, they control, not that they always control the grounds because it is tricky in some of those venues, but they control the facilities and where they decide to play, where most of those grounds are just great. But one thing I would say is we've seen grounds all around the world have some of these problems before. I know there's been 2 in India recently, so it looks slightly worse, but I have seen this in other places as well. And it's the idea that a cricket ground just dries isn't as a given right across the cricket world. There are certain places like Australia where cricket grounds dry incredibly fast. Many other places around the world where that isn't the case. Was Rohit right in his second innings approach? He was just trying to win the game. I don't think we can spend too long worried about those sorts of things. So yeah, no, I've got no worry there. Speed the Goat says, when Ashwin and Jadoo retire, what would happen? I think this is the fascinating one because the West Indies come out of their great period in what, 85, 86-ish? So Holding, Roberts, Garner, I'm trying to think who else. There's an obvious decline. And so at the back end of that, Walsh comes in and then Ambrose comes in. They get Bishop, but they never fully get Bishop. But they match that up, of course, with Richie Richardson comes in, Brian Lara and Carl Hooper. And so they sustain the winning, even if it's not quite at the level of before, because Ambrose and Walsh are not as good as 4 fast bowlers, but they're so good that you can almost put, anyone with them, and they're still going to be competitive. And so Patrick Patterson and Bishop take them to another level, but Patrick Patterson is not treated particularly well, and he and Bishop can't stay fit and everything else. But they managed to go another, 9 years. And Australia is a really good side in that period. Australia is coming through even before Warner McGrath. Australia is really, really coming through, and yet Australia can't dislodge them. That, to me, is the difference between an era and a dynasty. So you could say that Australia was the best team of all time because they won a lot more than the West Indies did in their period. I think that's a fair thing to say. But Australia did it in one era, right? As in, it was essentially on the back of having Warne and McGrath. This is not discounting all the different batters and everything, because but they were the best team in the world when Warne and McGrath assembled, and when Warne and McGrath left, they were no longer the best team in the world anymore. Right? It's almost as simple as that when you look at the Australian team. For all the other advantages they had, professionalism and the way that they thought about cricket, it's almost as simple as that, right? And I think the fact that they were so consistent comes down to those other things I just mentioned. But when it comes down to that, whereas with the West Indies, you have a situation where their great players retire. So Clive Lloyd moves on, right? Who did they lose? Roberts, Garner, Marshall, Holding. Croft went early. That they also lost a whole bunch of players to rebel cricket who they never picked anymore, who were fantastic players. And yet they go on to the next generation. So Ashwin and Jadeja retire. The big question then is this an Ashwin and Jadeja system? Right? And you throw Bumrah in there as well, but Bumrah's probably not going to retire straight away. But is it the fact that they have this incredible seam bowling crop, which they did, but also the two best spinners in the world? Or is it now that they have enough players and everything else? Because if you think about it at the moment, what team in the world wouldn't trade their spin prospects for Kuldeep and Akshar? Like, is there a team that wouldn't want those two, especially with Akshar's batting? So Australia, I think, would trade Lyon for Kuldeep and Akshar, right? Lyon and Murphy. Maharaj, I think you would take, and Maharaj and Harmer, Dean Pete, whoever you want as your second spinner there. I think, again, you would trade those. Shakib is basically retired. So, again, you would take Kuldeep and Akshar. You know what I mean? Like, there's some decent spinners around the world. So the backups are really interesting. But then I think a lot more pressure comes back onto the seam bowlers at that point. How often Shami, who's coming towards the end, will continue to play. So we might just have a period where India have to retool slightly, and there might be a bit of a dip. And so you might not quite get that full West Indies. You might get a little bit more like what happened with Australia, where it wasn't like Australia suddenly were terrible, but they also weren't at the same level, right? And they had trouble with who did they lose to at home? South Africa at home. Then they lost to England at home in a short period of time, and then they got really good again. And so it wasn't like they dipped off completely, but Warne and McGrath were the reason that they were the best team in the world so consistently for such a long time. Ashwin and Jadeja, especially with the all-round abilities that they have, are a big part of that. Or can I said Ashwin, didn't I? Yeah. Can Akshar come in and just continue what Jadeja has done without too much of a drop off? And then they have the ability to pick Kuldeep, and then, maybe Washington Sundar comes through eventually and matures into the player he should be. And then it doesn't matter. And then Bumrah keeps playing. Siraj takes eventually levels up to where he should be. And they get another great seamer, right? Or another high quality seamer. Maybe Akash is just, as I said before, that sort of, who did I say before? Peter Siddle, Paul Rifle. Maybe he's Paul Rifle, or I think West Indies never really had a Paul Rifle, did they? They had Van Burn Holder. A slightly different kind of cricketer, I suppose. But is there a? I'm just having a look at Van Burn Holder's record, by the way. 40 test matches, 109 wickets to 33. Yeah, so Akash would be slightly an upgrade on that. But yeah, is that kind of where they're going? But we don't know. And also, we know that there's so much talent when it comes to, what about Reddy? If Reddy comes in, you've got that whole step up, right? They've got another all-rounder. What if Hardik wants to play for 2 or 3 years of Test cricket? That will overcome a lot of Ashwin and Jadeja going away, right? Like, if you've got Akshar Patel and Hardik in your side, that's a pretty fair team, that you can build there, because again, it gives you the incredible flexibility. And I think that's the thing with Ashwin and Jadeja, is it gives them endless lineup variability and depth. at all times. And so if Reddy, Hardik, and Akshar can do a similar thing, and they've still got Bumrah, and they've got Jaiswal and Gill and whichever other, Sarfaraz, Aya, whichever other young player goes on to be, a superstar, and there's plenty of those potentially around, that's still a really, really good lineup. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating question. I've been thinking about this a lot of like, what happens next? Does it stop? Does it slow down? Is there a retooling, or does it march on? Because I think that is the difference, is the marching on is really, really, I think, and at that point, you would have to think that in the next 20 years, so India have never maximized their talent pool, right? Compared to the other countries. I mean, New Zealand's famous for maximizing their talent pool because they don't have any other choice, but India haven't. Whereas the IPL is opening up little pockets that weren't around before, and professionalism, is coming in at such a vast level. And that's what I was talking about before with the academies and everything else. So you have the potential in the future to do a similar thing to what Australia did over from 87 till 2007, right? Even before Australia was, had knocked off the West Indies. But you have a similar thing of building a academy system. It would be something else these days. But what I was saying before is that constant treadmill of players and professionalizing to a level that no other team can get to, which means that you might be able to do what Australia thought they were doing, right? Australia thought they were building a system that was going to keep them above everyone else for generations. What they didn't realize was that they got a little bit stuck in their ways and they didn't keep progressing with their thought processes. And so England came on, and England actually was probably slightly smarter the way they thought about cricket than Australia was. And so Australia fell behind. Then you have a combination of the IPL and India and everything coming up on the other side, and the professionalism with India. And so again, Australia fell back a little bit. I mean, they've still been really good, Australia. They've still won, a couple of World Cups and a World Test Championship recently. So they haven't fallen off. But they didn't quite get to that factory level that I think they thought they were going to get to. India could be the first team that ever does that, right? India could be the first team who ever is consistently good for 2 or 3 generations back to back because of the finances, because of the talent, because of the passion for cricket, all those different things. They could be the first team that ever does that. But it may also not happen right now, right? Like the Jadeja Ashwin thing might just happen. And the other thing that you don't know is, if you go back in the history of cricket, the West Indies dynasty is fascinating, right? Because there was no problem with West Indies talent, but West Indies talent wasn't developing correctly in the West Indies, in large part because of how amateur cricket was there. Because of Lancashire League and Staffordshire League cricket, a lot of those guys fast-tracked their development. Then they played county cricket, which again fast-tracked their development. Then they played with Kerry Packer, which again fast-tracked their development. And they became professionals when everyone else was amateur. No one saw that coming, that whole boost that they had. And then they had a secondary boost with T20 cricket for a similar reason, right? Talent isn't the issue over there, right? It really is the access to developing your game and being a professional that is the issue. So let's say India get really good and continue, and there's no drop off at all. Is there an issue at that point with is there just a flare up team, right? Like, I don't know, South Africa find another Callis, South Africa at the same time find a Callis and an Aubrey Faulkner and I don't know, AB de Villiers. And then suddenly you're just like, well, how do you beat this team? Right? They've got 6 bowling options and their wicketkeeper can average 55, right? Like, do you know what I mean? There could be a weird team that comes out of nowhere that does something like that as well. So, and that goes back to the way we think about cricket is like the West Indies were great, then Australia were great. There's a whole period in the 80s when New Zealand and Pakistan were both fantastic teams that no one really talks up much anymore. Right? Because they weren't number one. There's often other sides. That Pakistan team in the 80s is legit, right? Any other era, if West Indies doesn't exist, we're talking about Pakistan from the 1980s over and over again. So sometimes you can be a great team and just have a greater team in your era, right? And so, there's all these different things. Anyway, I think that is... Oh, wait. Oh, we got more. Great. India full strength squad for the New Zealand series. I think they'll start resting people, won't they? Would be my guess. I could be wrong with that, Manon, but I'd be shocked if they weren't resting people. All right. Looks like we've done everyone. Well, thanks for watching. Well, Varun definitely wants a break. He was half asleep when we started this. He might not. I'm surprised he actually stayed awake all the way through. I am Jared Kimber. Thanks to Varun and Rakshit for helping us put all of this together. We do the scoreboard. Kind of the test matches I cover, I suppose. I think I'll be covering the New Zealand India series every day for another broadcaster. And so I'll definitely be doing the scoreboard for that. I'll probably be doing it for India, Australia. I'll be doing it for we'll be doing key games of the Women's World Cup as well. I don't think we'll do all of it. There's so much cricket on at the moment. But certainly there's a few games. We'll be doing a lot more. So there's heaps of content to come on the main channel. Thank you to everyone. If you haven't thrown us a like on this video yet, please do. Oh, Cyril, did Virat Kohli look better versus spin in this test relatively? I don't know. I wasn't paying enough attention, Cyril, on that one. If we're being honest. But yeah, we'll be around. We've got heaps and heaps of content to come. We've got some really good videos on Sophie Eccleston, and we might have one on Marizan Kapp, and there's someone else who I've forgotten as well. Oh, Chamari Atapatu will be another one that we'll probably have a look at for the Women's World Cup, and we've got some really cool ones. We've got one about Shaheen Afridi and Pakistan bowlers and what has happened for Pakistan bowlers. Spoiler alert, they don't take any wickets. All right, we will see you again very, very soon. Thanks for coming over. Goodbye.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber.